Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. This season, we are talking with leaders inside organizations focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking with them about best practices and proven tools for positive change. We are also sharing vignettes from our new book, Allyship in Action, to help leaders take real, tangible action on DEI right away. This work is important because all humans need to feel seen, heard, and belonging in the workplace. We have with us today Jeff Akin, and he is the host of the Starfleet Leadership Academy podcast. Yes, it is a podcast focused on Star Trek, which we will dig into in this episode. And he's also a 20-year veteran of public and private sectors. He has extensive experience in both media and entertainment, as well as over 2 decades in management and leadership. Jeff specializes in listening to others, helping them unleash their true potential, and giving feedback that is authentic yet kind. This pro wrestling TV broadcaster turned executive leader is never afraid to get his hands dirty when it comes to improving lives. Oh my gosh, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Julie. It's so exciting to be here. What a winding road I took to get here, right?
I wasn't expecting the next words to come out of my mouth. It's like pro wrestler broadcaster.
Yeah.
That
Well,
is
I think owning who I am and my privilege up front, right? I'm a heterosexual, cisgendered white male in an executive position, right? So like I'm all the things.
Own it.
But when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was be like Hulk Hogan, right? I wanted to be that superstar in the ring, the comic book hero. And I never got to do that, which in hindsight's a good thing. But I did get to be a part of a really, really exciting industry. And because of that, it taught me a lot of stuff about like talking into a microphone and trying to be at least a little entertaining.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you owning your privilege as a part of your story. I also, having gotten to know you, know you're really passionate about DEI. And for our listeners, we're always interested in having folks like in the trenches that are doing this work. And I know in your day job, you've actually had the chance to really improve folks' lives and increase the diversity of your team. Tell our listeners what you're working on.
This is my thing, right? I work in the public sector right now. I'm an executive manager for a state agency, the largest state agency where I'm from. And what's ironic in that is we serve people with disabilities, and specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we don't really hire them, right? Like we're happy to give them some money here, go kind of do what you want to do, but working here, that might be a different story. And when I took the position I'm in now, they had hired a few people with intellectual disabilities, which I thought was great on paper. And then I walked into the office and saw what was really happening, and it wasn't great. This team was segregated from everyone else. They took different breaks. They had their lunches at a different time, and they worked in a different part of the building. It was immediately disgusting and heartbreaking, right? Like I meet these incredible people, and then I find out that they're treated like second class people at best, right? And so like in that second, like I remember the moment, I remember where I was sitting, I remember like how I was related to, I'm like, I am here, I exist to change this. And that's what I did. That's exactly what I dove into.
So cool. Well, I think what's great about this is a lot of times we observe a problem, right? We come in new to a team, you're like, "Ooh, this doesn't feel so good." And our hesitance to bring it up because it's uncomfortable, it's awkward. Like, do people really want to acknowledge this as an issue? Wouldn't it be easier just like keep things the same? So I love that you saw that as an opportunity to really take courage and action as an ally. How did you approach the situation, Jeff?
So I guess really to kind of set the context, I believe in what I call the Peter Parker principle of privilege. It's a lot of P's, but it's that with great privilege comes great responsibility. And I own my privilege. I understand that it lets me do and say things that others can't. And that's where I don't always necessarily even think of myself as an ally. I try to think of myself as an accomplice, right? Where I'm just, so the way I approach this is I first started talking to the leadership in this organization, just asking what is going on? like, what is happening here? I had to understand like what what was the game I was kind of playing? What's the backstory? What are the rules, in this? And so step number one, after I understood that, is I said, okay, so what you're telling me is there's no business reason that this group of people sit in this other part of the building. They're like, no, but that's just where we put them. I'm like, okay, that changes. Tomorrow we are putting them on, general population out with everybody else where the cubes are. What cubes do we have available? How can we get, people placed? And some of the, we ran into a couple barriers because some of the people had job coaches or behavioral supports that would come as part of the stuff. So we had to make sure that they had enough room for more people. But we did immediately. Like, it was just like, oh, well, this cube's not quite big enough. Cool. Well, this one over here is, oh, that's actually a manager cube. Cool. Well, it's going to be Joe's cube now. Like, that's what we're doing. And so we put that into place. And then from there, we started so in this organization that they're working in, they receive the mail for the organization. And we're talking 10, 15,000 pieces of mail every day, really high volume. And the whole team does a lot of work with that. But again, this group was doing their work in a different part of the building. So they would do stuff, and there was a whole mechanism to move buckets of mail from their area to the other area. And so we just started breaking down our processes and using Lean and Six Sigma concepts to wrap in process improvements on top of everything else, but really just integrating everyone into every process and picking up some process improvements along the way. What I loved about that approach was not only did we create a stronger team and bring these people together with everyone else, but we improved the processes for everyone. So not only was it like, oh, now I know this other person, it was my job is easier because I know this person in there. And so we gave everyone a series of wins right out of the gate.
Well, I love what that story highlights is a lot of times when we make the workplace better for all people,
Yeah.
right? It works better for all people.
For everyone. Yeah.
Great example, because I think it's the curb effect. It's pretty well known in the disabilities world of, once we carved out the curbs, right, for folks in wheelchairs and those that had physical disabilities to move more easily, it got a heck of a lot easier for people like me with strollers or people at a bike. And so this whole idea of it truly does elevate the workplace for everyone and makes it better, more inclusive, more productive, more innovation, absolutely bears out in the data as well. Jeff, I'm curious, did you encounter resistance?
Yes, there's always that dirty part, right? Where you'll pick up a rock and all the bugs come out. So a couple things. So initially there was really not any resistance at all initially, right? And in fact, this was heartbreaking. There were long-term employees who had worked there that didn't even know this other team existed. So the first kind of resistance was, well, why did we hire all these new people? It's like, they've been here for 3 years. They've been a key part of your process for a long time.
Awkward.
Yeah, in there. But what happened super quickly in this was we found out that the people doing the work that we had brought in many of them were bored and wanted to promote and do better things. And so we started to kind of create some pathways for that. And that's when the resistance really started to rear its head. People used words that we don't use anymore. You're telling me we're going to give that R word a job, or what? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. But the way we faced that resistance was head on. We had created, so one thing that we've kind of learned early on, and again, I think an overriding theme to this is, here's a thing we carved out for these people that have intellectual or developmental disabilities, but really it applies to everyone and makes everyone in a better way. So we found we're going to have a quick team huddle and do an update. But this group needs a heads up before we just drop it on them. But so do these other people that have never, said anything about having a disability of any kind. And so we'd kind of pre-meet and then meet with them. But because of that, we had this really great relationship with people where they could just raise their hand and say, hey, so-and-so said this really terrible thing. And I'm like, thank you for that. We're going to go address it immediately. Yeah.
Well, and you have a forum, right? I think a lot of times organizations, well-intentioned organizations I work with, like, well, DEI is the thing. We're all on board, so let's just do it. Everyone knows this is just part of doing their job. I'm like, do they? Like, how do
Yeah.
you know who's not really supportive? Because I think to me, it's scarier when you have like a passive resistor. Versus what you're talking about is like active resistors.
Hmm.
Like they're blatantly saying, like, I don't know about this, right? I'm skeptical. Here's a way it's not going to work, that kind of thing. I'd rather deal with somebody that I know where there's coming from versus people that are hiding it somewhere.
Yeah.
But you have to create a forum for that communication to happen. The pre-meet, the meet, the one-on-one sidebar, the
Yeah.
hey, we don't use the R word anymore. Please don't do that. And here's what you're going to say instead. Because people do need a bit of education along the journey and they need some support.
Hmm.
I'm curious, Jeff, like what have you seen as far as like the results of intentionally focused and you're not just focused on disabilities, but folks with intellectual
Yes.
disabilities as well.
Yeah. And so really all disabilities, but really, like you said, laser focus on intellectual developmental disabilities, I think, and hidden disabilities, I think that's most disabilities tend to be hidden. But I think it's an area that we just have so much room to grow and enrich. So what has happened is at first, right? So we just kind of got those initial process bumps, or whatever, where it's like, oh, okay, we have process improvements, things are better. You notice a couple smiles, on the floor you hadn't noticed before, and those are great, right? But it's also not the end all. The end all started coming because we'd created these relationships, because the people with intellectual developmental disabilities were able to see the pre-existing staff as like contributors to the work and vice versa on that whole thing. They started collaborating together. And what that's resulted in, this is fast forwarding a couple of years, but it really only took about, I don't know, 6 or 7 months for some of this stuff to really start clicking. But all of a sudden, I've got the chair of our fund committee is a person with an intellectual disability. The person co-chairing our lean committee who takes process improvement pieces is a person with an intellectual disability. I have one, like my huge success story that I love telling her story. And I only tell bits of it because it's her story to tell. I don't want to own all of it, but she came to us to open mail. It's her first job she'd ever had. She had gotten a bachelor's degree in something when she was at home, just collecting, a check from stuff. So she did online school and earned a degree, came to us to open mail, came to me, told me that she was bored out of her mind. So we started developing, interview skills, resume writing, those things, working with her on it. She's promoted 4 times since then. She's a team lead helping to process background checks for people. And she just, I guess now it's been almost a year, but she got accepted into a master's program and is working on her graduate degree. And I think so for an individual, those are some of the payoffs, but also for us as an organization, we have such a richer culture where people take time to talk to each other, connect with each other, appreciate each other. And I think if you want to talk about like hard metrics, right? What's my bottom line look like? Blah, blah, blah. I have some of the most loyal workers across the board, regardless of their level of disability, because we've created an objectively visible environment where we're actively being welcoming to people. We're addressing those outliers in real time, and people are okay with that. So as a whole, what's the outcome? We have almost zero turnover. We have people doing amazing work and enjoying their jobs and having real human connections with people across all dimensions of diversity.
That's cool. That's really cool. And I can tell you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. Like it's very much evidence in what you're sharing in that story. Wow. Like think about how someone was overlooked like their
Yeah,
whole life.
whole life. I one of the people that works for me, I tend to call him a kid because he was when he started working for us, but he's a grown man. And he shared with me a letter that he wrote to the Social Security Administration well, it's just before that we started responding to the pandemic. So about 2.5 years ago, I guess. But he wrote a letter where he said, "Thank you for supporting me through my whole life. I don't need your support anymore. I have a job that provides me with paycheck and dignity. Yeah.
Dignity.
And at that moment, and that's become my thing. Like, I get to talk about this in different venues because I'm so passionate about it. But I think it just hits a thing that it rings true for most people in the workplace, assuming basic needs are met, right? That paycheck, it's great. It's not the point. It's the dignity that we get for being a contributing member of society. And it might feel good, right? We can pat ourselves on the back or whatever, that, yeah, we send disability checks to people and they can live, they can go do things. But in my experience, that's just, I don't know, go sit at home, right? Go sit somewhere and don't let the world see you. Where I'm just like, no, seriously, come here. I want you. You can do amazing things. Let's help you do those awesome things.
That's cool. And it makes your culture better. Like, you had a culture before where people were being othered and not
Yeah.
eating lunch together and
Yeah.
not sharing a human experience. I mean, you could see how a lot of workplaces like that didn't survive COVID.
Yeah.
Right. Because they had this false sense of security and weren't inclusive, and people didn't feel things like dignity and respect that are core human needs. I read an HBR article recently that suggested that with the Great Resignation or renewal or whatever we're calling this whole thing, that it's really the employee-driven organizations that are surviving. And when you said
Yeah.
that zero attrition, you're not losing people. The people that are losing people are employer-driven, like want to hold on to that power and that authority, and you will be here or else. They're just not going to weather the storm.
Yeah. And I think too, for us, because we were employee driven, and we've even stated this, we put it in writing that our priority is our people. And the work that we produce is a side effect of focusing on our people. And that's the thing I noticed, in the scope of everything I did when I came into this organization. When I walked in the door, there were over 150 people working there, and they were failing to meet any performance metric across the board. Within 8 months, we had integrated the people with disabilities. We, through attrition, people promoting out and being given opportunity, dropped down to about 80 people working there, and we were exceeding every key performance measure. And I attribute that to two things. And one was just actually creating the team, right? Bringing everyone together and allowing them to connect. But secondly, I changed the job of the managers I was working with. And I said, stop telling people how to do their work and when to do their work and where to do their work, and start helping them just be better people. Right? Ask really challenging questions and help them unlock the stuff in them. They know their work. Let them do it. And I mean, within 8 months, we were outperforming anything this program had ever done.
That's cool. Yeah, when you empower people, you really
It's
unleash their full
amazing.
potential. But we have a hesitance, we don't want to let go of control sometimes as managers, so it's okay.
But here's what's counterintuitive there. I've completely let go of control, and a bunch of things have happened. One, my stress levels are fully manageable, right? Like, my stress levels are more around the things that are happening to the people I work with.
Yep.
How can I help them be safe? How can I help them survive just this horrible mental health time we're all living through right now, barely surviving through right now? So that's my work-related stress, but also, everything's better. So when I go meet with my boss, or I have to go, it's a public agency, so I go in front of our state legislature, yeah, it's all great. It's all good. And you want to know why? I can let this other person tell you why, because they're the ones doing the work.
Yeah. That's that servant leadership, letting people do the work and decide how to do it, and giving them the credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
Jeff, I did want to shift gears. So listeners, if you picked up in the beginning of his bio, Jeff also hosts a podcast about, of all things, Star Trek, which I found fascinating. And this is how we got connected several months ago when I found your podcast. I wonder if he ever talks about diversity. Had a very intriguing conversation. And guess what? I was pleasantly surprised on a show that's been around as long as Star Trek that they've been a bit of a beacon of diversity. So I'd love to shift gears and focus on the fun stuff that I know you like to talk about, and tell us about the intersections of Star Trek and diversity.
Star Trek. Okay. So right up front, we got to own, if you're not into Star Trek, keep listening, right? This isn't going to be,
don't tune out. I'm not, I admittedly know hardly anything about this, but it's fascinating.
Like we're totally going to nerd out a little bit here, but it's just going to be about super good stuff. But Star Trek, it first aired in 1966. And like you and I talked about, Julie, you have to put yourself in that time. And that time is before me, right? So I kind of, know things from learning, but the world in 66 wasn't the world we're living in now. But the world we're living in now, in a lot of ways, is the result of what happened in 1966. So this was a show that was put on the air for the specific reason to paint a picture of a better future that's possible for all of humanity. And Gene Roddenberry, who created the show, did so by making a lot of really intentional and really controversial choices. Some of those were, he made sure, so the bridge, that's where all the action happens there. It's where the TV show is focused. But when you look at the bridge, you're going to see a white man in power kind of running things, but you're also going to see a man that's Asian up there taking care of stuff. You're going to see a man who's a Russian, who in 1966, for there to be a Russian on there, that's a big deal. You're going to see a woman of color on that bridge, like being a part of the action. She's not serving coffee. She's not, like a security guard or something. She's running operations on there. And in 1966, whoa, this didn't happen. And they never stopped pushing the needle, right? Some of the episodes are kind of very on the nose, right? So there was a really famous episode where they ran into some aliens who were half black and half white with like stage makeup they were painted with. And so I say that, half black, half white, you have an image that pops in your head, right? So hold on to that image. The problem with this alien race was one half, the ones that were black on the right side, hated the ones that were black on the left side because they were clearly inferior to them. And this was millennia, right, of oppression and race wars. And so very on the nose analogy, but also super accurate, right?
And the deeper message there, I'm going to think about Dave Chappelle and some of the stuff he does with comedy to show like you're hating yourself.
Yes.
This is a part of you too. Like, how can you be so hypocritical? But sometimes through story, right? Through characters, especially abstract characters, like Star Trek has, an alien, right, is easier to like put that on something else, that's something that's not human or somebody just like me, even though the theme is very much
right. Yeah. Well, I think about it like it's like guerrilla and it's like we're gonna sneak this in underneath. Oh yeah, it's a fun sci-fi story. Oh neat, whatever. I wonder if there's a takeaway for me in it. But like fast forward a couple of years with Star Trek, they on television had the very first interracial kiss ever. Captain Kirk kissed Uhura. But there's a couple things with it. Like you said, you got to do it in a sci-fi context. So they were being compelled to do so by a greater power, but they did it. And what's amazing about that moment was the network didn't want it to happen. The broadcasters, the syndication were like, we won't air this or whatever. So William Shatner went out of his way to give him one good take where they kissed and then mess every other take up so they couldn't use it. But to this day, there are countries that will not air that episode. It wasn't until just a few, maybe 15, 20 years ago that certain states would air that episode. Wow. Yeah, it was like, whoa, and almost cost the show, but they took that risk.
Yeah. Well, and what a great example of allyship with Shatner doing that, right? Knowing how to work within the system to use his power for good.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that happened with the cast. Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, right? Everybody knows Spock, but he advocated for Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. And he offered to give up part of his salary to make sure that she was paid at least somewhat equally. There's still a lot, where you are in the credits and stuff or whatever. But I mean, she was getting nothing, and he advocated to keep her on. She actually is a great story where after the first season of the show, she wanted to quit. She's a singer and a dancer, and she wanted to do more. She felt like she, wasn't getting to do a lot, but she met with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, you shall not, you must not quit this. You are necessary in there. And I think generally if Dr. King asks you to keep doing a thing, I think, you you kind of do that.
Right, because she had been the only one to break through that barrier. So
Yeah.
sometimes being the first, you pay the consequences
Yeah.
for the benefits you don't even get to appreciate yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's the next generation that often appreciates it. Dr. King's a great example of that. Um, yeah, and all these hidden stories here. Jeff, it makes me curious why this isn't more mainstream knowledge. I mean, why did I not know that that was the first interracial kiss on television? Why did I not know that, that what and I guess as a child watching this alongside my father. So yes, listeners, I remember from very young age watching Star Trek with my dad and not understanding any of it, but sitting there nonetheless and being told to stay quiet. But I remember seeing the image of the diversity you clearly painted of the cast. And at the time, as a child, I really didn't think anything of it. And I still, if you were to ask me like what TV shows, what media is like really doing a good job to showcase diversity, I don't think Star Trek would have come to the top of my list because then there's all these hidden stories.
Mhm.
Why is that?
I think a lot of it is because it's science fiction. And so you're kind of starting behind the curve a little bit. There's a little bit right out of the gate. And it's not popular, right? To be like, oh, this science fiction, this really nerdy niche science fiction show. But what's fascinating about that divide is there's like a doorway that you walk into, and then you're in the world of Star Trek fandom. And if you talk to a Star Trek fan, they're going to tell you, yep, first interracial kiss, first same sex, two women kissing on TV. The first time two women ever kissed on TV was a Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode. Right now, the new Star Trek, they're exploring transgender, like transitioning in pieces. They're exploring, what does artificial intelligence look like as a sentient life form? They kind of did that in the Next Generation with Data, but it was like this very clear, you're an android, there are limits. With technology, now they're having this conversation about like, our technology doesn't really have those limits anymore. And so what does this? So they're exploring these just wild, great concepts that to the general public are still like one or two layers of the onion out from their comfort level. Not three or four, right? Because 3 or 4, you never eat the onion out that far. That's can't do
Too
that.
much.
Too much. But they're always right, there at the front of stuff. But I think because it's Star Trek, it kind of gets a little bit of a bad name. That's not fair to say. It gets a little shelved, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's some sci-fi thing.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, sci-fi is very nichey, and I could also see how sci-fi is also the exact realm where we could push the limits. You're already pushing enough limits.
Yeah.
It's so futuristic. Why not just, like you
Why not
said,
go?
dig it another layer or two of that onion
In the
and go.
early 1990s in Star Trek: The Next Generation, they explored races that had more than one gender.
Hmm.
So we hadn't even scratched the surface of gender identification, and they're tackling it head on.
Well, we hadn't. I mean, we had a long time ago,
Well,
but
yeah,
we'd gone to the polarization of gender.
yeah,
But yeah, as a society in the 1990s, like, you're boy, girl, male, or female. Like, there's no in between. It's
yeah,
binary. We now know that wasn't always true in our civilization, but again, a great example of Star Trek, elevating these issues with the
yeah.
times or ahead of their time.
Ahead. And I think like really apply where I get really excited about it. One, just as a person who wants to be a part of making the world a better place for everybody, this is a fun way to see that and watch it. But as a leader who's actively out managing, creating systems and pipelines for people to be hired, for me to have something to look at where I'm like, there's the model, that's what it can look like, and here are the benefits of that. Like, they do a really great job on the show of bringing people together, diverse groups of people, diversity levels we can't even imagine because they're intergalactic, but problem solving things and just getting those perspectives from different species and different races and different abilities. And so I get to see that, and what it looks like. Where kind of my flavor comes in is then I adapt that to say, here's how I'm going to put it in action, and here's how you can put it in action too.
That's cool. That's cool. When I presume the audience might skew a little bit white male. And so it's really important
Yeah.
that we meet people where they're at with diversity and find stories and tools and make it fun for folks to engage in this
Yeah.
conversation that really don't have to.
Julie, I think that is the key. all of the great things about leadership, management, about being a person, diversity, equity, and inclusion, welcoming environments. We have done a really good job as a species in making them so dry and boring and inaccessible, right? I feel like there's this level of gatekeeping that happens really around leadership development, where I'm going to put forward a face of being inclusive. I'm also a white dude wearing a tie and a jacket and talking about the 34 irrefutable laws that you must, oh my gosh, seriously? But Star Trek shows us, and then what I try and adapt is, no, man, that can be so fun. It can be a blast. It also, I'll say, it can be easy. It's going to be challenging, but really the things you have to do require what you talked about, just that courage and vision to be like, well, it's kind of a whole reason I started the Starfleet Leadership Academy podcast was a bad meeting that I had. And I was like, I want meetings like Captain Kirk has meetings. That's what I want. And then found out you can actually do that, but I think it's also, I want a workplace like Captain Picard's workplace. I want teams like Captain Burnham and what she puts together. There are these examples there that are entertaining, relatable, and fun that I think makes all of this better for people.
That's cool. What two seemingly different things that you've brought together. I mean, that's kind of the definition of paradox.
Yep. My new joke, I just came up with this a little while ago, but I like to say that one day I was walking towards a mirror and I was holding a can of Star Trek. And in the mirror, I was holding a can of leadership. And then when I crashed, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup the Starfleet Leadership Academy was created.
Right. Yeah. It just mixes it right up together. Oh, Jeff, tell our listeners, how can they where can they find your podcast? Where can they find you to stay in touch?
Yeah, thank you. Starfleet Leadership Academy, anywhere you get your podcasts. On there, I also have my website, jeffakin.com. It's got the podcast. I also write blog posts on there, have a mailing list that you can join. And in fact, if you wanted to take action right now from that, I'd say go to jeffakin.com. Follow me on social media at Jeff T. Akin and sign up for the mailing list. I don't spam your inbox. I just give you value-added stuff. And there's going to be tips in there that you can apply right away to helping make your workplace a lot more welcoming and a lot more fun.
Oh, I love that. Thanks, Jeff, so much for sharing your story with us today.
You're welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.